Welcome to How to Yu-Gi-Oh!
Summary, fundamental, basic knowledge.
Chapter 1.
Here we are, the first and most important part of the summary videos. This is going to be the biggest one, I think, one of the longest ones. Now, what I want to say is this. Everything that I'm going to put here in this video is going to be extremely important and is something, unfortunately, you are going to need to know. This video is not going to be so much as complicated, but going to bombard you with a lot of information. I have tried my best as your Yu-Gi-Oh! Sensei to break it down into chunks, but this is going to be a video you're going to have to review again and again and again. There's a lot here that you need to know in Yu-Gi-Oh! This is all going to be knowledge that's going to be extremely important to you if you're new or even if you're coming back to the game. There's going to be some of the really basic fundamentals that you need to know about Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, with that being said, let's get on with the rest of the video.
Chapter 2.
Stars. So in this part of the video, I'm going to be talking about stars, what they mean in Yu-Gi-Oh! And how that when they're on different extra deck monsters, well, the common ones that we tend to use most of the time, they will mean different things. Let's go on to the next slide to explain what I mean. As we can see here, when we see stars on XYZ monsters, that means that these stars are equal to rank. That's right, rank are what stars are called on XYZ monsters. XYZ monsters do not have levels, they have ranks. That is something to take note of. This means that effects that are used that affect level do not work on XYZ monsters and have to be effects that work on rank. So effects such as gravity bind, level limit, such sort of effects don't work. Bear this in mind, as this can help you in avoiding some tricky situations that we find ourselves in Yu-Gi-Oh! Numbers. And so links, again, are cards that do not have stars on them at all. They have what we call numbers, known as the link number. The link number, you can see, is where the defense points usually are on a monster. On a link card, you will see it's instead of saying defense points, it showcases the number there, saying link 1, link 2. This in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is known as the link number. In other words, we call this numbers. That's the shortened version of it. But really, you should be calling it link numbers. Now, like XYZ's, links do not have a level. They only have a number. This means, yes, like before, they're not affected by level binding effects. Again, cards such as gravity bind and level limit don't really work. So, bear this in mind.
Chapter 3.
Soft once per turn. So, let's ask the question, what is soft once per turn in Yu-Gi-Oh?
This means the card's effect can be reused as long as the card is resummoned.
Okay, I think you understand this now. But what I want to say is that the wording soft once per turn is gonna be effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! That are gonna be on older Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. And these cards are not really up to modern standards. As in Yu-Gi-Oh! We don't have a card we don't have set rotation, so oh goody gumdrops, what Fun times we live in. Anyways, this means that cards that are a soft once per turn can be used or re-abused. And most of the time, Konami does tend to find a way to, if these cards are completely ridiculous and completely facilitate absolutely disgusting or persistent FTKs, make them a hard once per turn. For example, we've seen with the Red Eyes, monster that had the ability of special summoning dragons from the hand or graveyard, just whatever, for an infinite amount of times, and it was a soft once per turn, meaning that if this Red Eyes monster was resummoned, you could keep summoning dragons from your hand or graveyard as long as you kept resummoning it. We've seen that over time, when this was abused to such a ridiculous level, Konami then errated the card and made it a hard once per turn. But this is an exception and is something that has not really happened, and is not something that happens often. Konami doesn't usually errata soft once per turns to hard once per turns. Well, yes, it is a thing. It is a rarity, rather, it's an exception rather than the rule. So don't really bother yourself with fearing for once per turn, soft once per turns restrictions. Use and abuse them to your leisure. And now I'll talk about a hard once per turn. So, let's ask the question, what is a hard once per turn?
This means that if the card is summoned, the effect of the card cannot be reused, even if resummoned, until a turn has passed.
Okay, and now that you know what a hard once per turn is, I think you get the general idea. So, cards with a hard once per turn are cards we see on, is the sort of wording we see on modern Yu-Gi-Oh cards. You can see here with Ningirisu, as it says, you can only use. You should be able to see you can only use. Whenever you see the wording you can only use, this means that this is a hard once per turn. The lack of this wording means that this is not a hard once per turn, but a soft once per turn. Bear that in mind. And that's it.
Chapter 4.
Keywords.
Once per turn. Quick effect. During either player's turn, you can. When/if. You can only use. Neither player can activate.
Usage.
Once per turn.
Can only be used on your turn.
Quick effect.
Means cards effects can be used on opponent's turn as well as yours.
You can.
Player decides whether to activate effect or not.
If.
Used to initiate on summoned effects. For example, if this card is normal or special summoned.
When.
Is used to specify mechanic activations. For example, when a monster is.
Neither player can activate.
This means opponent can't respond to that card's activation.
You can only use.
Restricts effect use, meaning the effect when used can only then be used after a turn has passed. And there you have it. Part 1 of all the keywords that you need to know. Let's go to the next slide and get to part 2. Types of effects. 1. Turn effects. 2. Cost effects. 3. Counter effects. 4. Continuous effects. 5. Trigger effects. 6. Flip effects. Usage. Keywords. Turn effects.
Once per turn.
Can only be used on your turn. Counter effects.
Quick effect.
means cards' effects can be used on opponent's turn as well as yours. Continuous effects.
This card cannot be.
Trigger effects.
If your opponent activates.
Flip effects.
Flip.
Cost effects.
Pay.
Chapter 5.
So, let me ask the question. And the question that you would like the answer to. What is speed reading?
Speed reading is the skill that gets you to read a Yu-Gi-Oh card quickly and efficiently.
Now that we have that out of the way, as we go to this slide, let's talk about it. What are the keywords on this card?
Keywords on this card are cannot be. During your main phase. Quick effect.
Now that you know the keywords on this card, let me talk to you about how speed reading works. First of all, you're going to read from the first keyword of the card. Now, the first keyword is usually going to be at the number coding, as you can see there, number 2. So it'll be on the second sentence, or number 3. That's where it usually is. Where number 1 is pointed, as you can see on the screen, means that will usually be the summon effects of the card. So these will be the effects when the card is summoned. While it is important, this only usually applies if the keyword if, as I've mentioned, is used in that card. That is when you will need to read that card. But if is not placed where number 1 is on the screen, ignore it, forget about it. The rule of thumb when it comes to speed reading is always read only where the keywords are. If there's no keyword in a sentence, ignore it. It's not important. Leave it out. So where a keyword is, read from that point. If there's no keyword, don't read it. It's irrelevant. It's not important. That is the key to speed reading. So on Red Eye's Dr. Goon, for example, the only effect you should realistically be reading is the quick effect, which says you can discard 1 card, negate the activation, and if you do that, destroy this card. Okay? That's where the keyword is. That's where the most important information is. That's what matters, as that tells you immediately what you need to know. And would you look at that, just because you've read that effect, you only have 1 sentence to read. So you don't have all those other sentences to read. Let's go on and continue this practice and show you other cards and how you can read them and how speed reading applies. Okay, so let's talk about it. But first, let's find out what are the keywords on this card.
Keywords on this card are if. You can only use.
And now that you know the keywords on this card, let's finish and tell you how do you read this card and how do we speed read. Let me tell you again. The magic rule and the rule of thumb in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is always read from where the keywords are. If there's no keyword in a sentence, ignore that sentence. Only sentences that have keywords are what matter to you in Yu-Gi-Oh! So, with the way this card is, the only sentences you're going to be reading is where number 1 is placed, as you can see on the card, and number 3. Those 2 sentences are the only sentences you should be reading on this card, right? Where the sentence of number 1 ends, that first sentence, if this card is normal or special summoned, right? And you can see there, you can, okay? So that second sentence is what you will read because, again, it is a key. You can is a key word. So the first sentence, the first sentence is what you will read and only what you will read with the keywords in that first sentence until you see the full stop, as has been mentioned by number 3 there. Number 2, so from 1 to 3 is your first sentence, and that is the only part of the card that you should be reading. Now, number 2 is where it'll show you another keyword telling you that you can only use this effect of Albaz once per turn, meaning that notifies you that this is a hard once per turn. That's all I've got to say here. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so let's look at this slide and think about it. What are the keywords on this card?
Keywords on this card are when, quick effect, you can.
Now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about it. Again, here's where speed reading comes into play. The rule of thumb remains the same. Remember, read only where the keyword begins. So at this point, you're going to read, the only parts you're going to read are where number 1 is indicated and where number 2 is. Right? So the first 2 sentences of 1 and 2 as indicated on this card is where you read. Why are those the places you read? As we recall, I've told you once and I'll tell you a million times, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Sensei. If there's a keyword, that's what you read. If there's no keyword, ignore it, we don't read it. Now, obviously where the words when is, that means it is important to read, and that should be the first part where you read. As I've mentioned earlier in this video, when is a part of is a part of a card mechanic in the card, which supersedes its importance, and it means whenever when is mentioned on a card, it is mandatory that you read that effect first, as it's part of that card's mechanic and how it works on the field. Now, if a card doesn't have when or if, then ignore the text that you see on the first line of a card, especially on a monster. So when and if are the keywords that tell you that these are important effects that should be read first. Usually, where number 1 is placed on a card, usually that first line of text on a card, 90% of the time is not really important. Most of the time. Now, you will get obviously the when and if that does come from time to time, but mostly you tend to read cards from, you'll find majority of the time, is where number 2 is placed, from where the keyword is. The cards will say quick effect, or they'll say during either player's turn. They'll usually say you can only, or you can. You will see many keywords. When and if are rare, if that. Not saying that they don't exist, that they're not in the game, as you can see they are there, but they're not the sort of keywords, when or if, are not the sort of keywords you will see on a regular basis. So expect to see cards similar to Red Eyes Dr. Goon with that sort of layout, and expect cards like Fallen of Albaz, as we've showcased here, and Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon to be in the minority. Not to say that they don't exist, that they do. So once you get into the habit of, really what you should be doing is practicing reading cards similar in the style of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Make sure you just read the keywords, i.e. with just a quick effect, and you're good to go. Meaning you should only be reading 1 sentence on a Yu-Gi-Oh card realistically. If you're speed reading correctly, 100% of the time you should only be reading 1 sentence. That's it. The exceptions will apply when and if are on the card, obviously, but if those keywords are not on the card, then you won't read them. The rule of speed reading is if there's no keyword, it ain't important. We don't read that. It's completely useless information. That's the speed reading rule. No keyword, we don't care about it.
Chapter 6.
When and if. Context explained. So, first of all, let's talk about when on a card. Now, when I talk about the context of when will always be used on certain cards, right, that have mechanical activations, card mechanical activations. The best example is of Chao Feng, Phantom of the Yang Xing, when this card is special summoned. So what do I want to note here, and what do I want to let you know as a Yu-Gi-Oh player? What I do want to let you know is that whenever you see when, realize it's going to be usually 90% of the time, nearly 100%, it's going to be on extra deck monsters. Now, yes, you will find this card on effect monsters, and when you do, always know this. If a card has when in it, that means it's always a very powerful card and has more than one effect. These are the cards that you will usually 90% of the time going to be the spicy cards. They're going to have hidden effects. So be wary of these cards, especially with the wording of when. When, since these are card mechanic activations that are being specified and not summon activations that happen just on summon, they add a whole new dimension to Yu-Gi-Oh cards. So whenever you see a card with when, always highlight this in your mind, as this is a very special card in Yu-Gi-Oh, and they're given such sorts of relevance. Cards with when are usually, with when as the key word, are usually the cards that you'll tend to find get limited or banned in ban lists, as they usually have multiple effects. These are also the cards that tend to be one card combos. These tend to be the cards that do too much. So that is a key indicator of when you see when on a Yu-Gi-Oh card. It's a warning sign. It is a sign that you're in for some nonsense. You're in for some complete and utter bullcrap. Bear that in mind. Let's move on. Alrighty then, let's talk about it. The wording if. And let's explain the context here. If is a sort of wording you're going to see denoting or letting you know as a Yu-Gi-Oh player about summon effects. Now, unlike when, if is very linear in terms of how the effect works. As if whenever it's placed on a Yu-Gi-Oh monster means that the effects will always only apply to when the card is summoned. This also gives you, as a player who's facing the card or as a player who's playing the card, just linear options, as you don't have such versatile options. While yes, there are times when if effects can be extremely dangerous and extremely powerful, you tend to find that they'll only be used on cards that give additional summons. Cards such as Formula Synchron, IP Masquerena, cards that usually have a quick effect, but the quick effect will be used for summoning or for an additional summon, to go to an extra deck mechanic, to go to give an additional special summon, whatever it is. They'll usually be tied to summoning. Now, as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, what you need to realize is that this helps you and allows you to realize how to manipulate and how to stop if effects in Yu-Gi-Oh from happening. As long as you have cards that negate summons, then you'll stop if effects. So, cards that have if in them in their text, which you'll always find as the first sentence, you are never going to find the effects of when and if on the third or last sentence. There will always be the first sentence of the card. Now, the good thing about cards that have if in them, since they're very linear, they're very easy to read and easy to understand. For example, as you can see here with Zapper Shrimp, it says if this card is special summoned. That's it. So all you'll need to know is that the summons on the effects on this card are going to be linked to when this card is special summoned. So that's important, because what if does is that when if is placed on a card, it becomes the card's activation condition. So if any other effects that are stated on the card are placed there, they will not activate if the wording of if, or in other words, if the summon of the card is negated. Extremely important, extremely significant, and powerful knowledge as a Yu-Gi-Oh sensei, as you can see there. However, when the wording of when is used, when this card is normal or special summon, that changes the whole dynamic, and that changes the whole ball game. As when are card mechanic activations and not summon activations. There's a huge distinction here, which means that it's up to player discretion. You can, there's a choice of whether you're going to summon it, or whether you're going to activate the effect, or whether you're not going to activate the effect. Card mechanic activations give the player a choice, and that is something that you need to realize again as a Yu-Gi-Oh player. So always be wary of the wording when, not if. When gives you as the player using that card options, but the opposing player, when they see the wording when, means they have less options to stop you. Whereas with if, when you see that wording, it means you have more options to stop the opponent, as you only have to stop their summon. Whereas the opponent using the card with the wording if, they have to make sure that their summon goes through. That's the general summary, and hopefully you understand that statement. Look and reveal. Context explained. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about reveal. So, the wording or keyword reveal is going to be a keyword you're going to see sometimes, but not all the time. But it is important to realize that this is a wording and this is part of what Yu-Gi-Oh is about. And as your Yu-Gi-Oh sensei, I must let you know that reveal opens a whole new way to play Yu-Gi-Oh. Reveal, as in its entirety, as you can see with the danger lineup, as dangers specifically have brought this keyword reveal into the forefront, as reveal has existed for a long time as a keyword in Yu-Gi-Oh, but has not been of relevant use, as we have not seen it since the days of, the Eye of Truth, one of the cards, one of the continuous traps in the early sets of Yu-Gi-Oh. That's beside the point. The point is, reveal means, as its keyword or action suggests, you reveal the card to your opponent to activate this card's activation condition. This therefore means that when reveal is on a card, it offers a whole new way of actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, one of the ways to stop dangers from activating, and in fact, the only way to stop dangers from activating, is to have their hand already revealed. Simply, with a card like Eye of Truth, Eye of Truth is a continuous trap that essentially states that your opponent plays with their hand revealed. Now, if their hand is already revealed, then dangers cannot activate their effects. And part of the reasons why dangers were so powerful, and are still very powerful today, is that we have no effects that stop revealing. In fact, there's only one card in the game that stops revealing, and that is the Eye of Truth, as I just mentioned. There's no cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That stop revealing. And thankfully, dangers are the only cards, monsters anyway, that have this mechanic of revealing. And when they did, they were limited all straight away. And now we can see in our recent ban lists, they're bringing them back to the game and slowly by surely releasing them from purgatory ban list. But that is it. So be wary of reveal. It is there. It is a mechanic I believe Konami is not pushing anymore, a keyword that they're not really placing on cards, as they, I think, have begun to realize this is a very powerful keyword, and it's a word that can completely go out of control if it is placed on more cards, right? So as it avoids a lot of cards. Well, yes, there are ways to deal with it, and there are ways to stop it by tying it to other activation conditions, but still, it's a huge hack. And that's possibly why you're not going to be seeing this effect of reveal or keyword very often. It's good to know, but and handy to realize and see, but don't worry about it. You shouldn't be seeing this seeing this wording often. Let's move on. Alrighty then, and now we're going to talk about the wording look. Look has been one of the oldest keywords that we've had in Yu-Gi-Oh! But look has been a keyword that has been extremely powerful. And usually we've seen with 100% success rate, if a card effect has look in it, eventually, and it is used in the competitive scene often, it has 100% success rate of getting banned. For example, when we see the card like Confiscation that had the keyword look in it, it is banned. We are seeing the wording of, Forceful Sentry that had the keyword look in it. Guess what? It is banned. We're seeing a trap card. We're seeing a trap card that had the word look in it, that was similar to Forceful Sentry or Trap Dust Shoot. Guess what? It is banned. We're seeing other cards similar to, I think, Mind Crush. Guess what? It had the word look in it. For a time, it was banned, and then it was then errated to therefore mean something else. So know this, that the keyword look is extremely sensitive subject when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! As it's always been used for disgusting or simply toxic or promoting toxic behavior. In fact, I would even go as far to say, as an Easter egg, that toxic behavior started with the keyword look, as look is a very infamous keyword in Yu-Gi-Oh! And most players who have played the game since the game's inception only know this card for negative connotations. In fact, there's been no positive effect in Yu-Gi-Oh! That has the word look in it. Every effect that you see with the word look in it usually is of a negative connotation and usually means it's going to either do something toxic or will produce something toxic. There's always something wrong whenever we see the wording look. So this is a wording I will say as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, be wary of this wording, and whenever you see this wording, be very careful. Look out for it, use it yourself, but you have been warned. This is a keyword that is really on everyone's radar, as this is a keyword that is notorious for bringing down the pain and the misery to all Yu-Gi-Oh players all around. That's it. Unaffected. Context explained. Here we are, so let's talk about it. Unaffected. Unaffected is a keyword you're going to be seeing. And I think it's an effect that has been used from time to time, and it's now creeping up in popularity as we've seen it firsthand on boss monsters, right? We've seen it firsthand on boss monsters, as that's where the wording started from, and now we're beginning to see it everywhere, as it's become a card synonymous with nonsense, right? Whenever we see a card or card that has or monster especially, that has the wording unaffected, we as a player, especially the person facing it, know that we're in for a hard time. That usually means 90% of the time, these are the cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That have unaffected on them, that have a lot of text and a lot of reading, right? So what are the patterns, or what are the ways that we can mitigate reading for unaffected? Not much, really. I would say you need to use the speed reading tactic, as I mentioned before. Unaffected is a keyword, but it isn't important. It's usually treat it as a continuous effect. It's not. Yes, it's a keyword, but it's not a keyword of relevance. So 90% of the time, 100% of the time, ignore it. find the keyword on the card and read from there. So, for example, like a card like Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon, you're going to read only the once per turn effect from there and read it from there. While, yes, there are other effects on this card, and yes, the first line of text does have unaffected by other card effects, but it is not important. When you're reading an unaffected card, realize that the first line of text is always going to have the unaffected clause or the unaffected keyword right there. Ignore it, forget about it, and just read the other important keywords that are there. Now, you're going to tend to find that unaffected has now gone out of favor as it's a double-edged sword. Konami is using it, but they don't use it often anymore, and it's used very, very sparingly now. And I think it has been, there was an experimental phase with boss monsters, but now I think it's going out of favor and it's not being used so much. That's it.
Chapter 8.
Tribute / advanced summon. So in this part of the video, I'm going to be talking about tribute and advanced summoning. Let's go on to the next slide.
Levels are the stars you see on effect, normal, synchro, fusion, pendulum, and ritual monsters. Monsters with levels from 1 up to 4 can be normal summoned, as you are allowed 1 normal summon per turn, unless there are effects on the field that increase summons. Monsters with levels from 5 to 6 need 1 sacrifice to summon. Monsters with levels from 7 to 8 need 2 sacrifices to summon. Monsters with levels from 9 to 10 need 3 sacrifices to summon.
Final chapter.
And here I am at the end of this summary video. Well, hopefully you have found what you need in this video. Yes, it's quite extensive, and yes, it's quite large. But I should have covered the basic essentials that you need to know in Yu-Gi-Oh! Future summary videos will cover more nuanced and more high-level things that you'll need to know. But for now, these are, I would say, the primary basics, the primary things you'll need to know, whether you're coming into the game or have left the game, whatever it is. Check this video out, and but feel free to skip the parts that you don't need, hence why there's timestamps and there's all these things there. Feel free to just watch the parts that you need, the rest discard it. If you already have the knowledge or you know these things already, or some of these things are a bit intuitive. The parts that confuse you, mention it in the comments, I'll answer them, but most of it I think I've answered relatively well, I believe, in this video. And with that being said, tune in next time as I'll talk about more things in this summary videos. Hope to see you soon.
We come to the end of this video. So, as I like to say, you are one step closer to becoming a Yu-Gi-Oh! Master. My fate, right, is in your hands.